A luxurious mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, casts its shadow over meticulously manicured gardens. Madison Reynolds, CEO of Horizon Innovations and one of America's few black billionaires, walks through the marble corridors of her $28 million home. Her tech empire, built from scratch in just a decade, is now worth over $4 billion. Every morning, Madison drives her custom Bentley to the heart of Manhattan, where her company occupies the top 5 floors of a gleaming skyscraper. From her penthouse office, she oversees more than 5,000 employees and leads innovations that have transformed the artificial intelligence market. But something deeply unsettles her. Through the windows on the 85th floor, she observes a stark contrast to her world of luxury and privilege. On the bustling streets below, street vendors endure a relentless struggle for survival. Immigrants, single mothers, elderly individuals, all fighting against time, weather, and prejudice. Madison knows this reality all too well. 30 years ago, her own mother was one of those figures on the streets of Brooklyn, selling hot dogs to support 3 children on her own. The smell of mustard and caramelized onions still evokes vivid memories of a childhood marked by poverty and perseverance. Now, at 45, at the height of her success, Madison can't ignore the call of her conscience. The stories she witnesses unfolding on Manhattan's sidewalks are echoes of her own past. Talented, hard-working people trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of survival. In a decision that shook the corporate world and left her executives stunned, Madison announced she would do something unprecedented. For 24 hours, she would abandon all the comforts of her billionaire life to work as a street vendor on the streets of New York City. No security team, no assistants, no privileges. The company board tried to dissuade her. Her public relations team begged her to reconsider. A billionaire CEO can't just become a street vendor, they argued, but Madison was resolute. Her reason for this bold decision? An uncomfortable truth she needed to expose to the world, no matter the cost to her reputation or social status. What Madison discovered during those 24 hours on the streets not only changed her perspective forever, but also triggered a series of events no one could have anticipated. This is the story of how one of America's most powerful women decided to challenge the very system she was part of, and why her revelations left the entire country in shock. On the eve of her experiment, Madison sat in her apartment-sized closet, staring at rows of designer clothes and handcrafted Italian shoes. For her mission, she chose the simplest pieces she could find: faded jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and worn-out sneakers she used for workouts. She removed her diamond rings, platinum Rolex, and sapphire earrings. For the first time in years, her reflection in the mirror showed only herself, stripped of the status symbols that had become her second skin. "I want no advantages," Madison explained to her 16-year-old daughter Olivia, who watched with a mix of concern and admiration. "I'll start with exactly what any street vendor would have: $200 to buy wholesale goods." Her security team was in a panic. "Mrs. Reynolds, at least let one of us follow you discreetly," pleaded Kevin, her security chief of 8 years. Madison was firm. "No, I need to experience this just like anyone else would." At 3 a.m., Madison drove herself in a rented Honda Civic to the Bronx wholesale market. The place was already bustling with activity when she arrived, with street vendors negotiating prices and loading goods. With her $200, Madison bought what she could: bottled water, packaged snacks, and a few basic tourist souvenirs. Her plan was to sell near Central Park, where the tourist traffic might ensure some sales. As she arranged her goods on a small folding table, the same kind used by thousands of vendors daily, Madison noticed curious glances from other vendors. An elderly woman, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been selling churros at the same spot for 25 years, approached her. "First time?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, her English heavily accented. Madison nodded, feeling the real weight of what she was about to face for the first time. "Good luck, dear." "You'll need it," said the woman, offering her a freshly made churro. The sun began to rise over Manhattan, marking the start of Madison's first day as a street vendor. What she didn't know was that the next 24 hours would prove far more challenging than any boardroom meeting or multi-million-dollar negotiation she had ever faced. Madison's first customer appeared at 6:45 a.m., a jogger who stopped to buy water. He tossed $1 on the table and grabbed the bottle without even looking her in the eye. For the first time, the billionaire, used to commanding rooms full of executives, tasted the bitter reality of social invisibility. By 8:30, the heat was already intense. Madison realized she had forgotten sunscreen. Mrs. Rodriguez, noticing her discomfort, shared her own, a gesture of solidarity among vendors that Madison would never forget. "Cops!" someone shouted around 9:15. Madison watched, stunned, as several vendors quickly packed up their goods and disappeared down side streets. She hadn't known the area required a special license for street vendors, something she didn't have. "You need to get out of here now," whispered a young vendor named Marcus, helping her pack her things. "If they catch you without a license, you'll lose all your merchandise and get slapped with a $500 fine." Heart racing, Madison ran with her folding table and goods to a side street. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, who routinely closed multi-million-dollar deals, was now evading the police for trying to sell bottled water and souvenirs. When the dust settled, Marcus explained there was an informal system among the vendors. They looked out for each other, warned one another about inspections, and shared information about the best-selling spots. "How do you expect to make money selling in the same spot as everyone else?" he asked, shaking his head. "Come with me. I know a better place near Bryant Park." As they walked, carrying their goods across several blocks under the scorching sun, Madison began to understand why her mother always came home with aching feet. The physical reality of street vending was brutal. At the new location, an even more unsettling revelation awaited her. A man in a suit, whom she recognized as an investment bank executive, stopped at her stall. "How much for the water?" he asked, fiddling with his smartphone. $2, Madison replied. The man finally looked at her, his face twisting in disgust. $2? It's one at the store. You're all the same, always trying to scam people, he snapped before walking away. Madison was paralyzed. In her normal life, that same man would probably treat her with the utmost respect. The stark difference in treatment was shocking, but the day was just beginning, and even harsher lessons were ahead. By noon, the thermometer read 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The asphalt radiated heat, and Madison felt her back ache from carrying her goods. Her sales so far barely covered the cost of her products. A woman stopped at her stall, Rebecca Thompson, a public school teacher. Unlike other customers, she started a conversation. "Not easy, is it?" she asked kindly, as she bought a few bottles of water. Rebecca shared that her own father had been a street vendor for 15 years. "He sold hot dogs in Times Square to pay for my college. Today I'm a teacher because of his sacrifice." Their conversation was interrupted by shouting. A group of teenagers had deliberately knocked over Marcus's stall, scattering his goods across the sidewalk. They laughed and ran off, leaving the young vendor to pick up his now damaged products alone. Madison rushed to help him. "Why don't you call the police?" she asked indignantly. Marcus laughed bitterly. "And say what? That I'm selling without a license? That I lost merchandise I bought with money borrowed from the neighborhood loan shark because banks don't lend to people like me?" As she helped Marcus gather his goods, Madison learned more about his story. At 19, he had dropped out of college to care for his sick mother. Without a degree and burdened with medical bills, street vending was his only option. You know what's the hardest part? Marcus continued as he arranged his damaged products. It's not the heat, the bad customers, or even the cops. It's the way people look right through you like you're invisible, or worse, like you're a nuisance ruining their city's view. Madison swallowed hard. How many times had she walked past street vendors without noticing them? How often had her corporate decisions, made in air-conditioned boardrooms, indirectly impacted people like Marcus? A suited executive passed by, speaking loudly on his phone about a $500 per person business lunch. The contrast was surreal. In her normal world, Madison frequented those same expensive restaurants. Now she was counting coins to see if she could afford a cheap sandwich for lunch. By 2 p.m., exhaustion began to take its toll. Madison had never spent so much time standing in the sun. Her legs trembled, and every passing customer who didn't buy anything heightened her anxiety about recovering her initial investment. A particularly poignant scene unfolded when a young mother, Amy, stopped at her stall with 2 small children. She rummaged through her purse, carefully counting coins to buy a single bottle of water for the children to share. "Mommy used to sell like this too," one of the children said innocently. Amy smiled sadly. "Yes, sweetheart. And I might have to again. The daycare raised its prices again." Madison felt a lump in her throat. At her company, she had recently approved a cut in benefits for outsourced employees, including childcare subsidies, to increase quarterly profits. At 3 p.m., a sudden summer storm hit the city. Vendors scrambled to protect their goods. Mrs. Rodriguez lost several churros she had just made. Marcus desperately tried to cover his products with an old tarp. "Weather forecasts are a luxury for the rich," he remarked as he helped Madison shield her items. "We only know it's going to rain when the first drop falls." Soaked to the bone, Madison found shelter with other vendors under the awning of a commercial building. A security guard soon appeared, ordering them to leave. "You can't stay here. You'll scare the customers." Inside the building, executives in expensive suits walked by, dry and comfortable, some looking disdainfully at the group of wet vendors. Madison recognized several of them, CEOs and directors she had met with before. None of them recognized her now. "I have over $100 worth of products here," lamented an elderly vendor next to her, Catherine, showing her soaked merchandise. "That was all my capital. How will I pay for my medicine now?" The rain continued for an hour, but its effects would last much longer. For vendors living day to day, a lost afternoon could mean an entire week of setbacks. As the sun set, Manhattan's streets took on a new energy. Office workers began heading home, and street vendors faced their last chance to make money for the day. "Office folks are in a hurry now," Marcus explained. "They don't even look at the price. It's our best time to sell." Madison observed a dynamic she had never noticed before. A police officer who had spent the day pressuring the vendors now bought a churro from Mrs. Rodriguez. "It's always like this," Marcus whispered. "During the day, we're a problem. After hours, we're a convenience." At 7 p.m., Lauren, a marketing executive Madison recognized from corporate events, stopped by her stall. Without recognizing her, Lauren aggressively haggled over the price of a bottle of water. $1 is my final offer," Lauren said curtly. "There's a store on the corner selling for the same price with air conditioning." "The store didn't have to stand in the sun all day," Madison replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Lauren scoffed and walked away, muttering something about arrogant vendors. As the night fell, Madison noticed another aspect of street vendors' lives: their solidarity. Mrs. Rodriguez distributed her remaining churros to other vendors. Marcus helped Catherine carry her belongings, as her knees were too sore after standing all day. "We take care of each other," Catherine explained, "because no one else will." A city van drove slowly down the street. "Social inspection," Marcus muttered. "They photograph everything. document who's selling where, then use it against us when we try to apply for licenses. Madison tallied her day's earnings. After 14 hours of work, she had sold $180 worth of goods. Subtracting the $200 she spent in the morning, she was at a loss. And that didn't include the bottles of water she had given to other vendors throughout the day. As Manhattan lit up for the evening, the vendors prepared for their final battle of the day. Madison observed a new shift in the crowd, mostly tourists and people heading out for dinner or parties. "Hey, you!" A visibly intoxicated man approached her stall. "Sell me this water for half the price and I'll buy them all." His tone was condescending, almost mocking. Before Madison could respond, Marcus stepped in. "You better move along, friend." The man staggered away, hurling insults. "Happens every night," Marcus explained. "They drink, feel powerful, and think they can humiliate us." By 10 p.m., Mrs. Rodriguez began packing up her things. "I have to take 3 buses to get home," she explained. "If I miss the last one, I sleep on the street." Madison thought about her personal driver, always on call 24 hours a day. How many nights had Mrs. Rodriguez missed the last bus? How many times had she slept in shelters because she couldn't make it home? "The worst part isn't the work," Catherine said as she organized her merchandise. "It's the uncertainty. We never know if we'll be able to come back tomorrow, if the police will confiscate everything, if we'll sell enough to eat." A young woman approached the stall, Emily, an intern at Horizon Innovations, Madison's company. She bought a bottle of water without recognizing her CEO, but did something no one else had done all day. She asked Madison's name and thanked her with a genuine smile. "My grandmother was a street vendor," Emily explained. "She always said a little kindness doesn't cost a thing." By 11 p.m., when most of the vendors had left, Madison stayed, determined to complete her 24 hours. The cold night air contrasted with the day's suffocating heat. Her feet throbbed, her back ached, and for the first time in years, she felt the real weight of physical labor. The early hours in Manhattan revealed a side of street vendors few ever see. In the dead of night, Madison witnessed stories she could never have imagined. Around 1 a.m., a group of executives leaving a luxury bar passed by her stall. One of them, stumbling, knocked over several bottles of water. Instead of apologizing, he laughed and walked away. "Welcome to our world," Marcus said, having stayed to help her through her final hour. "To them, we're invisible until they need something." A woman approached, Angela, a night shift janitor at a nearby office building. She bought a bottle of water and shared her story. "I sell sweets during the day, clean offices at night. You know who cleans those executives' desks? People like me, who they pretend not to see during the day." At 2:30 a.m., Madison saw something that would forever change her perspective. A young vendor, David, was distributing sandwiches to homeless individuals. "I do this every night with whatever's left," he explained. "Everyone thinks we're the problem, but sometimes we're the only solution some people have." "How can you give away food when you barely have enough for yourself?" Madison asked, moved. David smiled. "Because I've been on the other side. And when you have nothing, you learn that sharing the little you have is what keeps us human." At 3 a.m., when Madison finally completed her 24 hours, she could barely stand. Her final earnings, $165 in sales, a $35 loss on her initial investment. But what she gained in perspective was priceless. A week later, Madison called an extraordinary meeting of Horizon Innovations' board of directors. What she announced left the room in stunned silence. Starting today, 30% of the company's profits will be allocated to a new initiative, the Tomorrow's Vendors Fund. We will provide interest-free microloans to street vendors, legal assistance to help them formalize their businesses, and scholarships for their children. When one director protested about the impact on profits, Madison replied, "If you think this is expensive, try spending 24 hours selling water on the street." The program began with Marcus, Catherine, and Mrs. Rodriguez. Within 6 months, more than 500 street vendors had received support. Emily, the intern who had shown kindness to Madison, was promoted to lead the project. Today, 3 years later, the fund has helped over 10,000 vendors across the country. Madison turned her experience into a revolutionary corporate policy. All company executives must spend 24 hours working as street vendors before assuming leadership roles. "Some people ask me why a billionaire chose to live as a street vendor," Madison says during her talks. "I answer, to remind myself that between the top of the skyscraper and the sidewalk below, the only real difference is the opportunity each person was given." The video of her 24-hour experience, discreetly recorded by her team, went viral and sparked a national movement. Other companies began adopting similar programs. But for Madison, true success lies in individual stories. Marcus now owns his own network of licensed kiosks. Catherine finally obtained her vendor license and secured a permanent spot. Mrs. Rodriguez no longer has to take 3 buses home. Her daughter, who received a scholarship through the program, graduated in business administration and now manages the family business. True wealth, Madison concludes, is not in what we accumulate, but in what we share. And sometimes we need to lose everything, even if only for 24 hours, to understand the true value of things. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And remember, the next time you pass by a street vendor, take a moment to stop. Sometimes a simple act of kindness can change not just a day, but an entire life.